A woman sits alone in a hospital waiting room, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and she has just realized something that no one warned her about. Her mother is dying 2 rooms away, machines marking time in soft, indifferent beeps, and in this exact moment, stripped of every distraction she used to hide behind, she cannot remember the last time she felt genuinely, quietly happy. Not excited, not entertained, not proud of an achievement that impressed a room full of strangers. Happy, she has spent 40 years chasing promotions, likes, approval, bigger houses, better vacations, and somewhere in that long chase she misplaced the actual feeling all of it was supposed to produce in the first place. This is not a story about grief, though grief lives inside it. It is a story about a question almost nobody asks themselves honestly until a hospital chair or something equally unforgiving forces it out of them. What if happiness was never something you were owed after enough achievement, and was instead something built, quietly, in tiny daily choices most people are far too busy to notice, let alone repeat, with any consistency? Because here is the uncomfortable truth. This video is going to sit inside for the next several minutes, without softening it for your comfort. The happiest people you have ever personally met were very rarely the wealthiest, the most successful, or the most conventionally attractive. If you actually studied them closely, the way psychologists have for decades now, across cultures and income brackets and continents, you would find something almost disappointing in its simplicity. They practice a small set of unremarkable habits daily, without exception, the way a heart beats without ever asking for applause or recognition. This is precisely where ancient philosophy becomes something far more useful than a quote stitched onto a pillow. Stoicism was never a theory dreamed up in comfort by people with nothing at stake. It was built by men and women who buried their own children, lost entire fortunes overnight, and faced execution with visibly steady hands, and they discovered, through direct and often brutal lived experience, exactly which habits produce a durable, weather-proof kind of contentment, and which ones produce only a brief flash of pleasure followed by a longer, quieter emptiness. It became, quite literally, an ancient weapon for living well regardless of circumstance, regardless of what the world decided to hand you on any given morning. But happiness constructed purely from discipline can become its own kind of performance, a well-managed mask concealing something unresolved underneath a calm exterior. This is exactly where the 20th century psychiatrist Carl Jung adds a second, necessary layer to everything we're about to cover. Jung spent his entire career studying what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to examine directly, the buried grief, the denied envy, and the old wound dressed up carefully as a personality trait, so convincing that even we believe it. He understood, through decades of clinical work, that a person cannot be genuinely happy while actively lying to themselves about what they actually feel underneath the surface. Real contentment, in his view, requires integration, not suppression. Owning every part of yourself honestly, not merely the parts that photograph well for an audience. 9 habits are coming. Each one follows the exact same structure, without exception. First, a real story or study that proves the principle holds up under genuine scrutiny rather than collapsing under it. Second, the philosophical anchor you can carry with you permanently is small enough to fit in your pocket and sharp enough to matter. Third, an honest confrontation of the excuse currently keeping you from actually using it. Fourth, a specific tactical action you can apply before today ends, not someday, but today. This is not a feel-good list designed for you to nod along to and forget by tomorrow. This is instruction, and instruction only works if you actually follow it. Habit number 1 is the practice of savoring, deliberately slowing down a pleasant moment instead of rushing straight through it toward whatever comes next. Researchers at Loyola University ran a study asking participants to deliberately pause and savor small pleasant experiences throughout their day, like a warm drink in the morning, sunlight coming through a window, or a compliment received in passing, for just a few extra seconds longer than instinct would normally allow. The group that practiced this daily reported measurably higher life satisfaction within only a few short weeks, not because their external circumstances had changed in any meaningful way, but because their attention finally had. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, in the private pages nobody was ever meant to read, that very little is actually needed to make a happy life, and that it is all within a person's own way of thinking, a line that is easy to read quickly and almost impossible to genuinely practice without deliberate effort. Here is your confrontation. You have trained yourself, likely over many years without noticing, to treat every good moment as a checkpoint to rush past on the way toward the next goal, the next milestone, the next acquisition you assume will finally deliver the satisfaction the last one somehow didn't quite manage to provide. That habit doesn't just waste good moments as they occur. It actively teaches your mind, again and again, that contentment always lives somewhere further ahead of you. Never here, never now, never in the moment, currently in front of your face. The tactical application is to choose one pleasant moment today. Your first sip of coffee, a text from someone you love, or the warmth of sunlight on your skin, and hold your full attention on it for a complete 10 seconds before moving on to the next task, not scrolling during it. Not mentally drafting your next email while it happens. Simply staying inside it, fully, for those 10 seconds. Habit number 2 is the practice of expressing gratitude directly to another person, not privately in a journal where it costs you nothing, but out loud, to their actual face. A well-known study out of the University of Pennsylvania asked participants to write and personally deliver a letter of gratitude to someone who had never been properly thanked for something meaningful they had done. Both the senders and the recipients reported a measurable boost in happiness that lasted for weeks afterward, far longer than the researchers themselves initially expected from a single afternoon's modest effort. Epictetus taught that a grateful mind is fundamentally a mind at peace, because gratitude is essentially an acknowledgement that your circumstances, however imperfect they currently are, contain something genuinely worth acknowledging, rather than only something worth resenting. Here is the confrontation. You likely feel gratitude privately, and often toward the people around you, but you rarely say it out loud to the actual person who earned it, because vulnerability feels considerably riskier than comfortable silence. And silence feels safer than the slight discomfort of one honest sentence spoken directly, face to face, without a screen between you. The tactical application is to think of one specific person you have quietly appreciated for some time, but never properly thanked, and to send them a detailed message today naming exactly what they did and precisely how it affected you. Not a vague thank you, but specifics. Habit number 3 is the practice of physical movement, approached not for aesthetics but as a direct mood regulator. A large-scale study published in The Lancet, tracking over 1 million people across various demographics, found that individuals who exercised regularly reported significantly fewer poor mental health days than those who didn't move their bodies at all. And interestingly, the benefit peaked at roughly 45 minutes per session, with diminishing returns beyond that point, meaning happiness was never actually about punishing the body into submission, only about moving it consistently and without excessive strain. Seneca wrote plainly that a sound mind requires a sound body, insisting that neglecting physical vitality inevitably dulls the clarity of thought itself over time. Here is the confrontation. You likely treat exercise as either a punishment for what you ate the night before or a project tied entirely to physical appearance. And both of these framings quietly poison the habit long before it can deliver its actual gift. A gift that has almost nothing to do with how you look in a mirror and almost everything to do with how you genuinely feel by 4 in the afternoon on an ordinary Tuesday. The tactical application is to move your body today for at least 20 minutes in a way that has absolutely nothing to do with burning calories, like a walk, a stretch, or a few minutes of dancing alone in your kitchen, done purely because movement itself regulates mood at a chemical level that willpower alone can never replicate. Habit number 4 is the practice of limiting comparison, specifically the daily habit of measuring your own life against curated images of somebody else's. A study out of the University of Michigan found that increased time spent passively scrolling social media correlated directly with declining life satisfaction over time, while time spent in direct messaging or genuine real conversation showed no such decline whatsoever, suggesting the actual damage isn't connection itself, but the specific, repeated act of silently comparing your unfiltered day to someone else's carefully filtered highlight reel. The anchor here is Seneca's own warning that nothing is ever enough for the person to whom enough itself is too little. A line written many centuries before a single photograph existed, yet somehow describing the exact mechanism of modern comparison with unsettling precision even today. Here is the confrontation. You know, rationally, that what you see online has been curated, edited, and selected for effect, and yet some part of you still measures your actual ordinary Tuesday against someone else's carefully chosen best possible Saturday, and that comparison, repeated silently and daily, quietly convinces you that your ordinary life is somehow failing by comparison to a highlight reel that was never fully real to begin with. The tactical application is to choose one specific hour today, ideally the first hour after you wake, and keep your phone off entirely during that hour, replacing the comparison loop with a single quiet thought about your own actual life before anyone else's version of theirs gets to quietly define it for you. Habit number 5 is the practice of naming difficult emotions instead of avoiding them entirely, a direct application of Jung's insistence that what we refuse to face ends up controlling us from behind the curtain of our own awareness. Researchers at UCLA found that simply labeling a difficult emotion out loud, saying the words "I feel anxious" rather than simply pushing the feeling away or distracting from it, measurably reduced activity in the brain's fear center. Meaning something as small and seemingly insignificant as naming a feeling accurately actually changes how intensely the body experiences it moment to moment. Jung wrote that people don't have ideas, ideas have people. Meaning that until a feeling is consciously acknowledged and named, it quietly directs behavior from somewhere just outside the edge of ordinary awareness, unseen but never absent. Here is the confrontation, and I want you to actually sit with this rather than moving past it quickly. You likely have at least one uncomfortable feeling sitting inside you right now that you are actively avoiding by staying busy, by reaching for your phone out of habit, or by telling yourself you'll deal with it properly later. And that avoidance is not making the feeling any smaller in the meantime. It is only making it louder through every indirect channel it can find to eventually be heard. The tactical application is to pause right now, this very moment, and name, silently or out loud, exactly what you are feeling, using one honest word, not an entire story explaining why, just the single word itself, spoken plainly. Habit number 6 is the practice of small acts of kindness directed toward complete strangers, not toward people who already owe you something in return. A study out of the University of British Columbia found that people who spent money on others, even in genuinely small amounts, reported greater happiness afterward than those who spent that same amount purely on themselves. And this effect held true consistently across every income level tested. Meaning, it was never actually about how much money existed in the first place, only about where the attention and intention behind it went. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the fruit of this life is a good character and acts performed for the common good, treating kindness not as a pleasant sentiment, but as a discipline every bit as serious as any other virtue he actively practiced daily. Here is the confrontation. You likely reserve genuine kindness primarily for people who can reciprocate it in some way: family, friends, and colleagues who will notice and remember the gesture, while strangers receive only the bare minimum of required politeness. And that quiet calculation, however unconscious it may feel to you, is slowly training your own mind to treat generosity as a transaction rather than as a settled character trait. The tactical application is to perform one small, specific act of kindness today for someone who cannot possibly repay you and will likely never even know your name. Holding a door a beat longer than necessary, paying for a stranger's coffee, or offering a genuine, specific compliment to someone quietly serving you. Let's pause here for a moment, because I want to interrupt this deliberately before we continue any further. You have been listening for several minutes now, and this is exactly the point in most videos where attention quietly begins to drift, where the remaining habits get absorbed passively instead of applied with any real intention. I want you to actually notice, honestly, whether you are still fully present here with me. Sit up if you've slouched on the couch. Put the phone down entirely if it happens to be in your other hand right now. And while you're resetting your attention, do one small thing that costs you absolutely nothing. Subscribe to this channel and tap the notification bell sitting right beside it. Not because every single video asks you to do this, but because this channel exists specifically to hand you frameworks exactly like this one. And that bell is the only reliable reason you'll actually see the next video the day it's released, instead of hoping it happens to cross your feed purely by accident. Now, with your full attention properly restored, let's finish this the right way. Habit number 7 is the practice of spending time in genuine solitude, deliberately, without any external input at all. A study published in the journal Science had participants sit alone with only their own thoughts for just 15 minutes. No phone, no book, absolutely nothing. And a striking number of them found the experience so genuinely uncomfortable that some participants chose to give themselves a mild electric shock rather than continue sitting quietly in silence with their own minds. That discomfort revealed something quietly important about all of us. Most people have gradually lost the ability to simply be present with themselves, unmediated by constant input from a screen or a voice. Seneca retreated regularly into deliberate solitude throughout his life, insisting that a person must first learn to live comfortably with themselves before they can ever genuinely live well alongside other people. Here is the confrontation. You likely fill every available quiet moment, every elevator ride, every red light, and every brief pause between tasks with a screen of some kind. Not because you actually need the information contained there, but because silence itself has slowly started to feel like a threat rather than a resource. That constant filling of quiet space is steadily starving you of the one relationship every other relationship in your life ultimately depends on: the relationship with yourself. The tactical application is to sit alone today for 10 full, uninterrupted minutes with absolutely no input of any kind, no phone, no music, and no book. Simply sitting quietly, letting whatever surfaces in your mind actually surface without immediately reaching for a distraction. Habit number 8 is the practice of physical touch and genuine, in-person connection. Not digital connection, but actual physical presence. A well-known study on the physiological effects of hugging found that individuals who received more frequent physical affection from loved ones showed measurably lower cortisol levels and greater overall resilience to stress, even when facing external pressures identical to those experienced by people who received considerably less physical affection. The human body, it turns out, registers safety through touch in a way no text message or video call has ever managed to fully replicate. Aristotle, though writing many centuries before any of this could be measured in a laboratory setting, insisted that human beings are fundamentally social creatures by nature, and that a purely solitary existence, however comfortable it might appear from the outside, was never sufficient on its own for what he called eudaimonia, a genuinely flourishing life. Here is the confrontation. You likely maintain far more of your relationships through screens than through actual physical presence these days. And while digital connection certainly holds real value in its own right, it cannot fully substitute for a hand resting on your shoulder, a real embrace held a moment longer than habit suggests, or the specific and entirely irreplaceable comfort of another human body physically present in the same room as your own. The tactical application is to seek out one genuine, in-person embrace today, with a partner, a close friend, a parent, or a child, held a few seconds longer than habit would normally allow you to hold it. Habit number 9 is the practice of the evening reckoning, closing each day with honest, deliberate reflection rather than simply collapsing unexamined into sleep. Seneca closed every single day of his adult life by asking himself 3 unchanging questions before sleep. What weakness did I overcome today? What fault did I correct in myself? In what specific way am I better tonight than I was this morning? Not as a form of self-punishment or shame, but as a quiet, private court, where he served simultaneously as both the defendant and the judge, refusing to let a single day pass by entirely unexamined and unaccounted for. Here is the final confrontation, and it genuinely applies to everything you have heard across this entire video. Happiness built carefully from 8 good habits still quietly evaporates without this 9th one. Because insight that is never reviewed, never honestly measured against your actual behavior that day, disappears completely by morning without leaving a single trace behind it. The tactical application, tonight and every night going forward from here, is to ask yourself those exact 3 questions before sleep, keeping each answer to a single honest sentence, slowly building a private, permanent record of a life being actively lived with intention, rather than simply passed through on autopilot. You now hold 9 habits that psychologists, philosophers, and psychiatrists have independently arrived at across entirely different centuries and entirely different methods of inquiry, all of them pointing toward the very same quiet, almost anticlimactic truth. Happiness was never a destination waiting patiently at the end of enough achievement or enough acquisition. It was always a set of small, repeatable choices, fully available to you today, regardless of what your bank account or your resume currently claims about your worth. You do not need to start all 9 of these habits today. Choose one. Choose the habit that made something in you quietly stir while you were listening, because that stirring is not sentimentality passing through you for a moment. It is recognition of something you already knew deep down and simply stopped practicing somewhere along the way. Start there tonight. And before you go, do the 2 small things that actually keep a channel like this one alive and able to keep making videos like this one. Subscribe and tap that notification bell right now so the next video, which goes even deeper into building a genuinely contented life rather than a merely successful one, actually reaches you the moment it's released, rather than getting lost somewhere in the noise. That woman in the hospital waiting room eventually found her way back to something resembling peace, not through a single dramatic revelation delivered all at once, but through small, repeated choices she began making daily, quietly, long before anyone ever applauded her for making them. You do not need a hospital chair to begin this same process for yourself. You only need today and the willingness to actually start. The quiet formula, 9 small habits behind truly happy people, peaceful minds, ordinary days. 9 habits science and Stoicism both confirm. Small choices, full life. 9 daily habits of the happiest people alive. Genuine joy isn't complicated. 9 habits backed by philosophy and psychology. Contentment on purpose. 9 everyday habits the happiest people never skip.